This season leading up to Easter, some of you practice Lent, some of you do not. I try to keep that as broad as possible to make sure all of you are included. One thing we're doing here during this season is, instead of necessarily encouraging you all to fast, we've been collecting food for our neighbors who are hungry. So if you'll notice, I hope you will, there's also a bunch of boxes stashed all over the place, especially by the entrances and the elevators, and they're filling up with food. That's great news. So thank you all for bringing food for our neighbors. We partner with AFAC to deliver that food to those who need it, and it always warms my heart to see those boxes getting fuller and fuller. So thank you very much. During this time of Lent, or before Easter, or whatever you want to call it or don't want to call it, I'm trying to look at texts in the gospel where people bring questions to Jesus. And we're paying attention to those questions that get brought up, and also to his replies. Each week someone asks a question that seems reasonable, usually obvious, and each time Jesus responds in a way that unsettles assumptions behind the question, reveals something deeper about who he is. Today's question is one that I think all of us have asked, all humans have asked for as long as humans have been humans. Whenever something goes wrong, we always try to ask, who sinned? We may not always ask that exact question, who sinned, but we do try to find a reason. When people encounter suffering, doesn't matter which kind, global, local, personal, our instincts always move quickly toward explanation. We want to understand why something painful has happened. We want to know what caused it, what led to it, who's responsible. We search for patterns that make the world make sense again. If suffering has a clear cause, then perhaps the world still makes sense. If we can figure out what causes the suffering, then maybe we can fix it, right? The first thing we want to do is to treat this like a problem to be solved, and to do that, we have to know what caused fill in the blank. That instinct appears in the gospel story before us this morning. Jesus and his disciples encounter a man who's been blind from birth. Immediately, the disciples ask the question, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, so that he was born blind? And I need you to notice before we read the whole chapter, and we're going to read the whole chapter, I need you to notice that this question assumes something first. The disciples do not ask whether someone has sinned, they ask who sinned. Their framework already assumes that suffering must be tied to a fault. If this man is born blind, someone is responsible. Either the someone that is him or the someone that is his parents, somehow, either he somehow bears this guilt or his parents do, someone messed up. That way of thinking is not unusual in the ancient world. Many people believed that physical suffering reflected divine punishment or moral failure. If something went wrong in a person's life, the assumption was that something had gone wrong in their relationship with God. That's where it starts. But if we're honest, that instinct, if you're trying to rationalize it right now and say that's how they did things back then, we don't do that anymore, we still do that. Even now, when something difficult happens, people often search for the explanation that restores order. What went wrong? Who's responsible? What caused this? And if there's nobody else to point a finger at, we usually point a finger upstairs to the big guy and say, that's supposed to be God's fault. We always kick the can up the stairs. Questions like that give this illusion of understanding, and they make the world feel predictable, but they carry a quiet danger. When suffering is reduced to fault, the person who experiences it can easily become an object of suspicion rather than compassion. And it's into that world of assumptions that comes this story today. The word of the Lord from John chapter 9. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it's day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had said this, he spat on the ground, made mud with the saliva, spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Now go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed, and he came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he," and others were saying, "No, it's just someone like him." And you know why they're asking. Pause. I know it's a long reading, but we're going to have to pause a few times. You know why they're asking, right? This is the normal question here. They're looking at this guy with even more suspicion now, because what they're actually trying to ask, what they're really getting at, the subtext is, he was just faking the whole time, wasn't he? We knew it. He was never blind. So this man can see, and the welcome he gets is one of even greater suspicion. He kept saying, I'm the same guy. I used to not see, but now I can see. I'm the same he. But they kept asking him, then how were your eyes opened? And he answered them, and he said, this man called Jesus made some mud. He spread it on my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. I went, I washed, I received my sight. And they said to him, and where is this Jesus? He said, I don't know. They brought him to the Pharisees, the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. And some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. And others said, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And then they were divided. So they said again to the man who is blind, and what do you say about Jesus? What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. And he said, he's a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and received his sight until they called his parents to the man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, look, we know that this is our son. He was born blind. We do not know how it is that he sees. Nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's a grown-up. He'll speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. And therefore his parents said, he's of age, ask him. So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. And he answered, I don't know whether he's a sinner. The one thing I know, I was blind and now I see. That's it. That's all I got. And they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he said, I told you already. You just didn't listen. Do you want to hear it again? He made some mud. I washed. I see. Do you also want to become his disciples? Do you want to go ask him and find him? And then they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this guy, we don't know where he comes from. And the man answered, that's an astonishing thing. You don't know where he comes from, but he opens my eyes? We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And they answered him, you were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us? And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him. And Jesus said to him, you've seen him. The one speaking with you is he. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. And apparently he said it loud enough that some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, surely we are not blind, are we? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. At the beginning of the story, a man who's been born blind is assumed to be in sin, At the end of the story, those who see are the ones who assumed to be in sin. His blindness was not his sin. Their seeing was. Everything is topsy-turvy in the story. The disciples kick all of this off with a question that seems straightforward, right? Who did this? Who sinned? But Jesus refuses to answer in any way that they expect. They give him an either or, and he finds a third option. It's neither. You're all wrong. It's neither this man nor his parents. And with that sentence, the entire framework collapses, and the disciples realize it's going to be a long day, and they wanted one of two answers, and they get a third, and he rejected both of the answers they wanted, and now they're on the back foot. This man's blindness is not the result of his own sin. It's not the punishment for his parents' sin. The tidy moral accounting the disciples expected simply just does not fit the mold. And this moment is important because it disrupts the assumption that suffering must always be explained through blame. And I know you want the world to work that way, but it doesn't. Jesus refuses to turn this man's life into a moral lesson or a cautionary tale. Instead of locating fault, Jesus shifts the focus entirely and says, in fact, this guy is blind so that God's work could be revealed in him. And that statement has sometimes been misunderstood, and we're not going to do that today. I know none of you are going to do that, but just in case. It's not that Jesus is suggesting that God caused this man's blindness in order to stage a miracle later. We're not stocking the pond with miracles. The point of Jesus' words is not to assign a divine motive behind this man's condition. Jesus is trying to redirect their attention away from blame and toward what God is doing about it. This man's life is not defined by a past cause. It's defined by the possibility of what God could do in this moment. What defines this man is not his failings or his parents' failings. What now defines this man is the potential God sees. And then Jesus says something that shifts the conversation again. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And with those words, the focus moves away from explaining this man's condition toward what God is doing in the present. You people, he says, are looking backwards at what had been done or not been done, but you're not paying attention to what's happening right now in front of you. The disciples were looking backward, searching for a cause. Jesus looks forward and speaks about the work of God. Instead of treating this man as a theological puzzle to be solved, Jesus responds by acting. He kneels down, he makes mud, puts it in his eyes, and sends him to wash in the pool of Siloam. When the man returns, he can see. The point of the story is not that suffering has been explained, but that God's light has entered the situation. Where others were trying to assign blame, Jesus brings restoration. In this moment, we see the kind of God that Jesus reveals. God is not primarily interested in locating fault when human lives are hard. God is at work bringing light into places that seemed to be only defined by darkness. And the question that began with blame is answered with mercy. And that changes the whole frame of the story. This man's life is no longer reduced to a problem that needs an explanation. Instead, his life becomes the place where God's work becomes visible. And they're so wrapped up looking for a cause that they're missing that God is doing something right in front of them. What the disciples first saw as evidence of failure becomes the place where the grace of God is revealed. Their instinct is to explain. They wanted to locate a cause. They wanted to assign responsibility to resolve the puzzle, but Jesus moves in a very different direction. Instead of explaining suffering, why does this happen? He moves toward the person who is suffering. Instead of assigning blame to who caused it, he brings the presence of God into the situation and says, you're so interested in who caused it. God is very interested in what can be done about it. And that pattern challenges the way we sometimes approach difficult situations. When we experience hardship, illness, disability, you name it, the temptation is still to search for explanations that make the world feel orderly again, that help us feel in control of things. But explanations alone rarely bring any sort of healing. You can understand the problem 5 different ways to next Sunday. It's not going to help you heal from it. What people often need most is not analysis, it's presence. In John's gospel, Jesus does not stand at a distance from this man born blind. He kneels in the dust beside him. He engages with him as a person, not as a problem. Everybody else talks about him right in front of his presence. Jesus talks to him. Even the Pharisees don't want to talk to him. They want to talk to his parents. Jesus talks with him. And it's through that encounter that this light of God becomes visible, and the only person who seems to notice is the one who's blind. For the man himself, this experience becomes more than a restoration of sight. As this story unfolds, he grows in courage and clarity. The one who was once questioned by others becomes a witness to what God has done. In the same way, when we encounter suffering, pain, loss, problems, hardship, whatever you want to call it, the invitation is not to rush toward an explanation, not to assign fault, or to pretend to solve the mystery. Instead, we look for the presence of God breaking into the realities of hardship. Don't look for what caused it. Look for what God is doing about it. Stop looking to assign blame to someone else and start looking to see what God's going to do next. Look at how God is going to bring healing and grace. And that's not a cheap promise that God will fix every problem. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that God has the power to fix all of your problems and will fix all of your problems, and if you don't have enough faith. We're not doing that. No cheap promises. But this is a matter of faith. What Jesus offers is a confession of faith that God can bring light even into the darkest places of human life. And nobody wanted to talk about that. They only wanted to talk about the problem. They only wanted to see the darkness. They couldn't see the light that was breaking into it. Instead of defending our understanding, we begin to bear witness to the grace that we have received. The light of Christ does not remove every question about suffering, but it does reveal that darkness does not have the final word. Does not. At the center of today's story stands a declaration. Jesus is the light of the world. And that light is not distant. It is present among us. It is the light that reveals the love of God in the face of Christ. The light that exposes truth and gives life to those who encounter it. That is what we hold on to in our darkest moments. Not an explanation, not understanding, not blame, not fault. We look to hope. We look for light. We look for grace and mercy. And where else would we look for that than at a place like this table? At this table, we come into that same light. This bread, this cup, they're not answers to every mystery of suffering. They're not going to tell you why bad things happen to good people. This table, though, holds signs of something deeper. This bread, this cup reminds us that God has entered the darkness of the world and that Christ has given himself for the life of the world. We do not come to this table as people who have solved the problem of suffering. We come as a people who trust the one who brings light into places where darkness once seemed to rule. And we stand at this table with a man who is born blind and says, I don't know how it all works. It's above my pay grade, but I do know it works. I don't know how Jesus dying on a cross can actually, we can do some math and I can draw some figures on a board and try to explain it, but ultimately at the end of the day, all I know is he did the thing and I believe it. I believe it. I don't need to know how. I don't need to know how it's all going to get fixed or how it's all going to get made right. All I do know is I stand at this table and I believe and Jesus Christ crucified, buried, and resurrected. We gather at this table trusting that Christ is present among us. We don't understand the metaphysics, but we believe it. We receive this bread and this cup, and we receive again the light that he brings, the light that reveals God's mercy and calls us to walk as children of that light. You can spend your whole life asking the question, why do bad things happen? Why am I having to endure this moment? Why are things like they are? And maybe you'll find answers and maybe you won't. But I do know your life will be so much more fulfilled if you spend your time looking to see what God is doing in the midst of the darkness, to try to see the light instead of focusing on the dark around you. It's easier to focus on the dark. Train your eyes to see the light. Look for it. Find it. Ask the better question. What is God doing in this dark place, in this dark time? Let's stand and sing.